Nu volgt een programma in de zendtijd van de politieke partijen.
Power to the poor people. Power to the stem voor de straat. Mensen, word wakker en stem in 2018 maart met de gemeenteverkiezingen in Amsterdam op de stem van de straat. En maak een einde aan die uitbuiting.
Mafia in Amsterdam, presented to you by Steve Brown, the notorious so-called drug lord of the Amsterdam-Noir. Theft, smuggling, rip-offs, betrayal, revenge, murder. Steve Brown is one of the few people that still lives to tell you the true story. Drugs, gambling, prostitution. Take a glimpse into the mind of the man that knew both killers and victims in over 40 homicide cases in the Amsterdam underworld. Also escaped an attempt on his life by a professional Balkan assassin. Best-selling crime author Steve Brown, once owner of the infamous government-subsidized coffee shops The Happy Family, knew all the notorious gangsters from that time and beyond. This is the forbidden story of corruption, organized crime, vicious, notorious murders, and treason in Amsterdam on the highest scale. The facts of the underworld that the Dutch government never wants you to know. This is the shocking truth behind the Amsterdam underworld.
My name is Steve Brown. Welcome to the first episode of the history of the Mafia in Amsterdam. In this episode we will give attention to how did the hashi trades originally started in Amsterdam. That started with the hippies who brought the hashish to Amsterdam for the first time. And we will give attention to the history of the Chinese Mafia, also called the Triads, which at one time were the most powerful organized crime group in Amsterdam, controlling all the heroin business and trade and almost all the illegal casinos. Okay, first before we start with this first episode, I want to introduce myself. I was born in the USA, and when I was 2 or 3 years I came with my family and my brother and sister to Amsterdam. My dad was a US soldier and fought in 1944 in the Pacific against the Japanese, and after the Second World War he was in the occupation army of Germany up till 1945. I grew up my whole youth up till like 26, 27 in the so-called very famous neighborhood in Amsterdam. It's called the Pipe. When I grew up there, it was a real original ghetto from working class people, or actually not working class people. Nowadays, it's actually funny. It's the most expensive neighborhood in the whole Netherlands. It's completely taken over by yuppies and expats. When I was 18, I started to work as a social worker, which was actually just getting a paycheck and sitting on the bar, drinking, fighting, and having fun. And I started as social worker also in the Pipe, in the ghetto, by the market, like I explained before. It was called that youth center was called Knooppunt, and out of Knooppunt came the Happy Family. Well, as you know, the Happy Family was at one point the biggest coffee shop in Amsterdam. We had like 6 coffee shops with a gross turnover, according to the IRS, of 50 million guilders a year. And we got a lot of attention at that time from the USDA. It was also the only hash coffee shop, I think, ever in the world who collected 2.2 million guilders subsidized from the government and the city a year. When the Happy Family was at its top, I mainly spent my time, at least like 8 months a year, as a so-called traveler through the wide world. I wrote a book about that and called it Steve Brown in Gangster's Paradise. I went, for example, to Indonesia, where I met with generals and admirals. I went, for example, to Lagos, Nigeria, where I was so lucky that I saw a live performance of the legendary Fela Kuti. I forget, it's a difficult name, but I was one of the few white people ever to be in his clubhouse and see him live performance, which was incredible. I will never forget. Then I was also, to name a few countries, in Afghanistan, just after the war was finished with the Russians. I was the guest of a king from the Pathan in tribal area, dressed up like a Pathan, Afghan, machine gun, everything, and saw the biggest hash factories you can ever believe. Many times, sometimes even for a half year in Morocco. And I was there, for example, guest of the sister of the king. I was in her palace up at the mountains in Tanger. Also, I was guest, to give you another example, from the so-called Grey Wolf. What at that time his real name was Hamido, the Grey Wolf. People say his fortune was at that time $500 million US, and one of the biggest dealers at that time. Furthermore, I had contacts and business with the IRA, Death Soul, the Turkish Mafia, PPK, the Pakistani Mafia, the India Mafia, the Yugoslav Mafia, the Chechen Mafia. I have to think very hard. If there's one mafia, even the Italian Mafia, the Sicilian Mafia, which mafia group I didn't met in my life at one point. Furthermore, I was jailed as suspect of the murder of the so-called biggest Dutch mafia boss, Klaas Bruinsma, and my good old friend, a real big dealer also, Tony IJsseldoorn, who they killed with 9 shots in his body. I spent 3 months as a suspect for that murder. At one point I studied at college for human science and got my bachelor degree. After that I went to the University of Amsterdam and studied law, where I also got my bachelor degree and had to leave the university according to a bomb threat. Some crooked journalist wrote an anonymous letter that they would attack me when I was in the college with a bomb, so they got fucking so scared I had to leave the University of Amsterdam for that reason. I cannot help it, but I was also at one time, I was a television anchor. I had my own crime show for Veronica. It was called Zware Jongens, Heavy Guys, Heavy Criminals. And finally, you can say in that media career thing, I'm really famous, almost culture. I'm famous for kicking the most famous but most crooked so-called crime journalist, Peter R. de Vries, kick under his corrupt ass. That's really famous in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands. It's almost like culture nowadays. And nowadays, I have my own show as underground presentator. This show is called The Voice of the Street, and it's the most watched program in Amsterdam by SaltoTV. We also call it not the talk show, but Talk Chicken Show. Anyway, now coming election for the city of Amsterdam. We are involved in that election. I am involved as the party leader, party leader of the Voice of the Street. Okay, that's all about me. Let's now watch this episode.